America, a nation of industry, democracy, and discovery. Today, the character of America is an easy, if complex thing to understand. But what was she like before? How has the American identity changed? Before the end of the Civil War, who was America then? I'm your host, Just Some Guy. And these are a few of the questions I consider with you on today's episode of The Quick and Dirty. We begin our Quick and Dirty at the violent formation of the new nation. Weary of taxation from Great Britain, and fearful of the perceived tyrannical abuse of power of King George's conservative cabinet, Anglo-colonists engage imperial troops at Lexington and Concord, catapulting revolt into revolution. What's important to note is that these colonists were fighting for political and economic liberties that applied only to themselves. Abigail Adams, wife of founding father John Adams, was sensitive to this, and made a request of her husband before the war was won.
In the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies, and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion, and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation.
To which John responds, "As to your extraordinary code of laws, I cannot but laugh. We have been told that our struggle has loosened the bands of government everywhere, that children and apprentices were disobedient, that schools and colleges were grown turbulent, that Indians slighted their guardians, and Negroes grew insolent to their masters. But your letter was the first intimation that another tribe more numerous and powerful than all the rest were grown discontented." In other words, you're funny. White colonial males are the real victims. This is one example of what early Anglo-Americans believed about themselves and the world. Who is America at this point? What kind of people would see themselves this way, and why? Thus we ask, what did they claim to believe? After the Revolutionary War, the 13 colonies governed themselves by the Articles of Confederation, which, in evidence of things like Shays' Rebellion, proved itself detrimental to the Union. Enter James Madison, the father of the Constitution. Having spent his free time studying what made ancient Greek government successful, he proposed the Constitutional Convention to draft a new constitution for the United States. The convention itself was a long, heated debate involving the American intellectual elite of the day. Madison fought for a Bill of Rights, in part because his time as a legislator was less than disappointing in the view of his religion. Let's listen to Madison as he fought for an amendment to the Declaration of Rights. "All men are equally entitled to enjoy the free exercise of religion, according to the dictates of conscience, unpunished and unrestrained by the magistrate, unless the preservation of equal liberty and the existence of the state are manifestly endangered, and that it is the mutual duty of all to practice Christian forbearance, love, and charity towards each other." For the father of the Constitution, all should be equal and enabled by Christian values. This was part of the greatest conflict in American history, chattel slavery. Frederick Douglass was a former slave who became a fierce international abolitionist. Behold the words of Henry Clay in a speech delivered at Lexington, Kentucky on the 13th of November, 1847. "It is a philanthropic and consoling reflection that the moral and physical condition of the African in the United States in a state of slavery is far better than it would have been had their ancestors not been brought from their native land." It was a vaguely Christian belief, largely in the Cotton Kingdom, that slavery was justified just because it brought civilization and morals to the people enslaved. That without these, the blacks would be barbarous, violent, and cruel. Frederick Douglass has some choice words towards this notion.
"I can scarce repress the flame of rising indignation as I read this cold-blooded and cruel sentence. There is so much of Satan dressed in the livery of heaven, as well as the taking consolation from crime, that I scarcely know how to reply to it. For 300 years, Christian nations, among whom we are the foremost, have looked to Africa only as a place for the gratification of their lust and love of power, and every means have been adopted to stay the onward march of civilization in that unhappy land.
Let that sink in. One thing to quickly consider before we get to the Civil War is the catalyst to its impetus, the Industrial Revolution. When the Industrial Revolution came to America, her citizens were experiencing a religious revival known as the Second Great Awakening. As part of that awakening, the Transcendentalist movement was born. Transcendentalists believed there was more to life than a miserable 14-hour workday, more to religion than fearful subservience, and even more to the human experience than the domination and rejection of nature. Here's a short excerpt from Henry David Thoreau, one of the leaders of the club. Be a Columbus to whole new continents and worlds within you, opening new channels, not of trade, but of thought. However mean your life is, meet it and live it. Do not shun it and call it hard names. It is not so bad as you are. It looks poorest when you are richest. The fault finder finds faults in paradise. Love your life, as poor as it is. Thoreau was very poetic. It is heavy conjecture, but perhaps something of the unpopular Transcendentalist movement did enter into the hearts of Americans with Manifest Destiny or American Imperialism. The famous artwork is presented for your consideration. Jarring though it is, we are now at the Civil War. In response to Abraham Lincoln taking office, South Carolina and a host of other southern states formed a confederacy. Confederates were reacting to a type of conspiracy theory that Abe Lincoln was going to destroy their way of life by taking their slaves. Within months, the nation tears itself apart. Thus, when Lincoln was reelected in 1864, he delivered a second inaugural. These were his closing remarks. Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. At that time, in the eyes of the representative of the entire nation, America was a people under the reprimand of God. I recall a conversation with a friend of mine, just some other guy. In it, we briefly wondered and concluded together that for an individual to harm themselves, even commit suicide, required some type of mechanism to override the primal response against it. Later on, privately, I wondered at the pain and ignored wisdom such an individual would possess. But I didn't wonder for too long, as World of Warcraft was calling me. America started, in a way, proud. But that pride could not be contained to one class of citizen. As the fruits of American pride blossomed in the hearts of her ever-increasing people, she found herself confused and distraught that who she wanted to be was not who she claimed to be. So who was America before the end of the Civil War? I think she was like a teenager, whose healthy rejection of a toxic parent left her a strong, if troubled, orphan. With potential and beauty, yet did her citizens need the longer lesson, though ministers were not a few. But this is what I think. And what do I know? I'm just some guy. This has been Quick and Dirty. Thanks for watching.